For 25 years, a miracle occurred on Warner Brothers. Servers, a living museum of heavy GIFs and HTML tables. But in 2021, the crime was committed. Almost nobody noticed. No candlelight vigil. No trending hashtag to mark the occasion. Just a clean redirect and the quiet burial of something that, by any reasonable measure, should have been untouchable. The Space Jam website, spacejam.com, launched in 1996 to promote a movie about Michael Jordan playing basketball with cartoon characters. Then, and somehow it survived every server migration and corporate restructuring. Every quarterly meeting where someone in a conference room asked whether they still needed to be paying to host a 20-year-old movie tie-in page. It survived the dot-com crash. The rise of social media, 2 full decades of web redesign philosophy that made everything before it look absurd. This was the digital Wild West preserved in amber for a quarter century against high, very institutional instinct a large media company possesses. It just existed. And then Warner Brothers needed to promote a sequel nobody asked for, and they pointed the old URL somewhere new, and just like that, the museum was closed. I want to walk through this like a crime scene, because it is one. The first thing you notice when you pull up an archived capture of spacejam.com from 1996 is that this was not built from a template. Each section of the site has its own internal logic. Different navigation structures, different layout approaches, different ways of handling images. The people who built this were not following a style guide. They were making decisions nobody had made before in a medium that had almost no real conventions yet, and you can see the process in the HTML itself. Image slices held together with invisible 1-pixel spacers, tables nested inside tables, background tiles that stretch and repeat in ways the designers clearly hadn't fully tested across every possible screen configuration. There's a download section with screensavers formatted for resolutions that almost no monitor still runs at. There's a press kit section built like a physical folder because whoever designed it had apparently never encountered a digital press kit before and didn't know there were other options. This is what it looked like to invent the web as you went. And the fact that those files preserved that messiness intact, unchanged for 25 years, that was the document, not the movie promotion. The construction process, the record of people figuring something out in real time and leaving their fingerprints all over it. They claim it's archived. The Wayback Machine has captures, Warner Brothers will tell you, so the history is preserved. But have they actually protected it? Because an archive capture gives you a photograph of a place. It cannot give you the experience of walking into it. When spacejam.com resolved to the 1996 content, that was a living thing, a browser loading something exactly where it had always been, unchanged, resolving the same way it did when the site first launched. That's continuity. And continuity is a different category of evidence than a snapshot. A snapshot shows you what something looked like at a fixed moment. Continuity shows you that it persisted, that for 25 years, through everything, the thing stayed. That persistence was itself a form of testimony. Something survived because someone at every step chose not to delete it. What that site actually was, looked at seriously, was the first major example of transmedia storytelling at scale. The film and media studies people started writing papers about this concept years later. The way certain franchises extend their fictional universes across multiple platforms, building out worlds that exist beyond any single film or show. Think about what the Orange Tape Memo did to Nickelodeon's institutional history, quietly rewriting an internal record to match a preferred version of the past. The Space Jam site was the global equivalent, except it documented a creative process honestly by accident, without knowing it was creating a record worth keeping. SpaceJam.com was doing something genuinely new in 1996 before anyone had named the concept. You could visit the Toon Squad's locker room. You could read player profiles for characters who existed only within the basketball game at the film's center. There was a section called Planet B-Ball with its own internal geography and navigation rules. This was not a plot summary. It was an extension of a fictional world, hand-built in HTML, at a moment when nobody knew that's what websites could do. A marketing team, selling a Michael Jordan movie, accidentally pioneered an entire discipline of media design. And Warner Brothers buried the record of that accident to put up a sales page for a sequel. I keep thinking about GeoCities. When Yahoo shut it down in 2009, there was a preservation effort. Volunteers scraped and archived as much as they could before the servers went dark, and they saved a significant portion. But what was lost was the texture, the experience of finding those pages through search, of them existing in the web's actual connective tissue rather than in a cataloged archive folder. Algorithms hate human mess. The commercial internet has been slowly eliminating its own informal past for decades, and every optimization is also a deletion, and most of the time it happens without acknowledgement because the thing being erased never had a press release. It just stops resolving. Nobody writes a headline about a hobby site going dark. Nobody marks the date when a fan community's last backup expires. It becomes as though it was never there. The Space Jam site had a studio behind it, which is exactly why its death was more legible than most and more insulting. What happened in 2021 is technically simple. Warner Brothers released Space Jam, A New Legacy. To promote it, they redirected SpaceJam.com to the new film's official page, a URL that had resolved to the same 1996 content for 25 years now pointed somewhere entirely different. The old site wasn't deleted in any absolute sense. Wayback Machine captures exist, and mirror sites were quickly assembled by preservationists who noticed what was happening. But the redirect was the crime. They took an address that had meant something specific for a quarter century and changed what it meant. They replaced the museum with a brochure, and they did it for a movie that had already forgotten why the original mattered. An address is not only a location, it's a contract. When SpaceJam.com resolved to the original site, the contract read, "This happened, it happened here, and if you want to find it, the path is open." The redirect voided that contract. Now, if you go to SpaceJam.com, you get promotional material for a film most people have already largely forgotten. You get the corporate revision of the past, which is another way of saying you get nothing of the past at all. You get what the company decided was worth keeping. That is a very different thing. And what disappears in that exchange isn't only a website, it's the primary source. The Space Jam site was not a document about the movie, not really. It was a document about 1996, about what it looked like to do something ambitious on the early web when nobody had agreed on what ambition meant in that context. The technical choices, the aesthetic decisions, the creative weirdness of sections like Swackhammer's secret files, all of it was evidence. Evidence of a specific cultural moment, of a specific way people thought about what the internet was for before the solutions got standardized into templates and design systems and optimized conversion funnels. That evidence still exists in archive captures, but archive captures are not the same as a living document. Reading a capture is more like reviewing an autopsy than shaking a hand. Preservation work matters. Archive.org is doing something genuinely important and chronically underfunded. The volunteers who mirrored spacejam.com when the news spread did something worth doing. But the broader pattern, corporations treating internet history as theirs to erase whenever maintaining it becomes inconvenient, that has no obvious endpoint. What happens when the last time capsule gets redirected? Not this site specifically. Every survivor of the early web that someone hasn't gotten around to deleting yet, still out there, still resolving, still holding the shape of how things actually were before the algorithmic cleanup crews arrived. When those finally go, the future inherits an internet that looks like what companies wanted it to look like. Optimized, monetized, no rough edges, no abandoned rooms, not a trace of proof that the mess was real and that real people lived inside it. What was the last website or online community you visited regularly that Google now says never existed? The forum that went dark? The fan site that outlived its hosting budget, the game servers taken offline quietly between patches. Put it in the comments. Someone should be writing these things down. The list is longer than any of us have stopped to realize, and naming something is not nothing. The record we leave behind reflects decisions about what gets preserved and what gets pointed elsewhere and what simply disappears with no announcement. Those decisions are being made right now by people whose primary interest is in selling you something. The archive is not neutral. The redirect is a statement. And most of the time, nobody notices until the URL stops working. We didn't just lose data, we lost the proof that we mattered. The graveyard is already talking. The final file is open, and it's colder than I expected.